We know that there are a lot of names that are famous, and we mentioned George Floyd at the top when I introduced myself today, but we have a mother here today who is from Boston, whose son was killed by the Boston police in 2012. And Carla is here to tell you her story. And this is a local story because I want us to remember that when we talk about this being systemic, that it happens here, it happens everywhere, and we want to work together to change that. So, go ahead.
And as Latoya said, this is a local story, but we know it needs to be a national story. We know that stories are coming out, and this must be one of them. And so please listen to her and take action.
My name is Carla Sheffield, and I've lived in Boston my whole life. As soon as my mother had me, she hopped on the first train smoking and came here. I am 54 years old, and my whole entire life has been here as a Massachusetts resident. So when I see our community in our town rising up for Black men and Black brothers across the country, I'm all for it. But I'm also for taking care of home front. Let's not forget about the children, the Black men that were killed here, like my son, Burrell Anthony Ramsey. I, for 8 years, have been looking for justice. And I'm gonna give you a little background on it. When it first happened, I could not tell my story because there were so many barriers. The attorney would say, don't say anything, or they'll twist your words around. The police wouldn't let go information that was pertinent to investigating. But the police did investigate themselves. They took all the time necessary. I felt like the investigation was to clear the officer and not to look for the truth. From the point of my son being killed to the not guilty verdict that was received in the end, the whole thing was a joke to me. And being a person with a master's in criminal justice, as I watched all these lies unfold in front of me for them to tell my son's story, I had no choice but to live with that because, one, I'm a Black angry woman as they compare us. Two, I don't have the money to fight the system. I don't have the money to appeal. And three, we don't have many attorneys standing up to fight for us without looking for the almighty dollar. Because I have a background in criminal justice, I was not letting this go. On August 21, 2012, there was a so-called call from the South End that went to the police department that said a young man was peering in people's cars. Somehow it went from a young man peering into a car to pulling my son over in a gold Cadillac in the South End. Now, mind you, I lived 10 years in the South End, so everybody in the South End knew my son. So for them to insinuate that my son was peeking in cars when he was driving a car, that was the first thing that got to me. They pulled my son over, chased my son down the street, killed my son, and then justified it. Their excuse was, the officer is from a good family. Well, I'm here to tell you, so isn't my son. My son came from a good family also. It hurts when I stand here because I've been a huge part of the community. But when they killed my son, it was like I was no more a part of the community. No police officer reached out to me. It seemed like everything that I was trying to do moving forward, barriers were put in my way. The police officers pulled my son over. My son had just gotten his license. He was driving his friend's car. His friend happened to already be in jail. So my son was using his friend's car to take his friend's girlfriend to work just so he can have a car to drive because he had just gotten his license, and that was the whole thing of him driving. So when they pulled them over, I didn't find this out until we got through court, but there was a Black officer on one side of the car and a white officer on the other side of the car. When they pulled my son over, my son asked, "Why are you pulling me over?" He did not respond. My son kept asking. My son had the window down a little bit so they could talk. When they asked for my son's license and registration and they didn't respond to why he was pulling them over, my son finally gave them the license. Now in court, it was said the Black officer on this side of the car had a warrant that had a young man's name on it. The white officer who took my son's ID license claimed he didn't look at it. He put it on top of the car. The other officer said he never touched my license, so my son's license. So my question is, if you are pulling somebody over and you have a warrant, isn't the first thing you're going to check is that person the same person on the warrant? You can't arrest somebody if you're going for a certain person and it's not that person. You have to make that clear. They didn't do that. They didn't tell my son that. So they took the license, sat it on top of the car, reached inside the car and tried to grab my son. My son took off and drove down into Tent City where we live. He jumped out the car and kept running. As he was running, the police were running down the street saying, "I'm going to get you, mother effer. When I catch your ass, you're not going to like it." They were shouting, "I'm going to get you," all the way down there, calling him all kinds of curse words. My son ran to a room where it used to be a teen center. The door was locked. As he got there, the officer's story is, as he was chasing my son turned around and shot at him. And that caused him to return fire, and he said he shot my son in the chest. So when I got the autopsy that was hand-delivered to me, for some reason, I kept calling for it and I couldn't get it. Somebody knew they were trying to, and I shouldn't say this, so I'm just going to say I got the autopsy, and it said different things than what they put in court. This is so hard. I've done a lot of programs that would help me stand here and tell my story, but the pain always comes back. Regardless of how strong you are, it always comes back. And then to go through the system and not get justice hurts even more. So when I see our mayor and our commissioners saying George Floyd, God rest in peace, George Floyd, and because of his death, we have the moment. We have to seize on this moment. But when the officer said that my son fired shots at him and he returned fire, shooting him in the chest, the autopsy showed that my son was shot in the side. The police officer's story changed 4 times from the time my son was killed to the time we got out of court. He even went home and told his father that he had just killed a black person. They wouldn't bring his father into court. The things that they bring into court, it should not be just for the prosecutor. They pick and choose what evidence comes in. So the evidence they brought in all favored the police officer. They wanted to use my son's background because he had been in trouble before. We couldn't use the officer's background. He's been in trouble before too. You can't make rules and pick and choose what's good for one and what's good for the other. Let's stop hiding behind our titles. Enough is enough. If you are a police officer, be a police officer. Stop hiding behind that qualified immunity, because you're not qualified and you shouldn't be immune from killing my son, period. When I first found out about my son, it wasn't a police officer who came and told me, it was kids from off the street. I did my own investigation from what I heard from the street, the police report, the police officer's report. I took all that and put it together. I work in the court. I got a master's in criminal justice. You are not just going to tell me anything and slide this under the rug. Everybody kept saying, "Oh, you can't file a case against the police. Oh, you can't get the police in court." I did all that. But what good is all that if we still have biased white judges sitting at the realm who don't give a damn about a black life? I've been sitting here because I'm a judge. I've earned this spot up until now. But now it's just your bias and your unconscious, your blatant biases that's ruling the court, and it shouldn't be like that. It should not be like that. There was not a jury of my son's peer. My son is African American. There was 12 white jurors. The first question, and this whole system needs to be overhauled, from the judge that are sitting there with tenure, time to go, to the clerk magistrates that just keep not allowing police reports to be filed. You should be able to walk into a court and file a police report and not have to explain why you're filing it, period. The avenue to file a charge against a police officer should not be a barrier. Getting justice and not having the money to appeal a case should not be a barrier to getting justice. Justice is supposed to be free for everybody, not just who you pick and choose. I want to recite a poem that I wrote 3 months after my son was murdered. And this will speak to how I really feel. We are called to the front line as mothers. When you heard George Floyd call his mother, he was also summoned in every single solitary mother, grandmother, aunt, sister, niece to come to the front line, because we can fight them all. We fight our own black men. We fight the system with employment. We're fighting education for our kids, healthcare, but we are always at the front line fighting. So we must continue as women to lead this front line fight. I entitled my poem, Hey Officer, but after I wrote it, I didn't think he was worthy of it. And it goes like this. Hey officer, I miss my son. I miss my child. You took him from me and hid all the while. I miss my son's face. My heart's in a broken place. You took my son without my permission. Now I'm crying, praying, and wishing for justice to be served, because if nothing else is what I deserve. You pretend to protect and serve. You got a nerve. You carry a badge and gun, expect a brother not to run. You wear a uniform pretending to be a cop. When he asks you not to, you raise your gun and shot. Now I'm left to wrap this around my head. The Boston police just shot my son dead. No words of comfort, you said nothing nice. I hope to hell this haunts you for life. A mystery shooter, I know it's weird. He shot my son and disappeared. It wasn't a child from off the street. It was Boston police that walked the beat. Oh yeah, you said he opened fire, but we all know that's cold, you liar. That's what your super told you to say. It makes it easier to clear you that way. Our children are dropping time after time, but to be shot by police, now that's a crime. Then to say his death wasn't violent, it was to me, because my life was silenced. As my story comes to an end, how do I tell my 7-year-old police are your friend? You reap what you sow, and just so you know, as Burrell's mother, I'll never let this go. Thank you.